Firstly, let's go over a theory that I've been seeing that I wanted to stop in its tracks. I mean, it's probably not gonna happen, because this video is probably gonna get like 6,000 views max, but either way, the identity of this little girl is 100% not Susie, the girl who goes on to possess Chica. Susie has been dead for a long time once the game takes place, being dead for over 50 years or so. So there is literally no possible way that this girl could be Susie. You may be thinking that she could be possessed by Susie, but we released her spirit in the Happiest Day minigame, and she has only possessed Chica as far as we've known. Some assume that the Happiest Day minigame takes place at the end of the timeline, however I don't think that's true. Considering how FNAF 3 was supposed to be the end, and that when FNAF 3 is over we get the good ending, to me that indicates that the Happiest Day minigame takes place in FNAF 3, especially considering how the simulated pizzeria FNAF 6 does not have to lure the original animatronics back to the pizzeria, meaning that they did not need to be released because, well, they had already been dealt with. So about this girl, let's go over some evidence about what we see on the poster. Firstly, there is her blonde hair. We know that it's blonde thanks to the rim lighting on the character being blonde at her hair, and while yes it may seem stupid, I think that the general consensus is that this girl is blonde. While rim lighting is the color of the light that it is instead of the color of the person, it also isn't going to be yellow on a darker surface, so this means that her hair is not black, eliminating Cassidy from the race. So this is not the spirit that was possessing Golden Freddy, or who a good amount of people consider the one you should not have killed, aka the Vengeful Spirit from Ultimate Custom Night. The girl in the middle is also wearing a jacket and what appears to be a denim skirt, fingerless gloves, white socks, and sneakers that light up Skechers style. Hashtag not sponsored, but like Skechers, hit me up, we can probably work something out. Now this may not be out of the ordinary to any of you, but this instantly reminded me of someone from a previous game. As I did mention this in another video, Elizabeth Afton. Okay, I get that she's been dead for longer than Susie, but just hear me out, okay? See, when we were playing Sister Location, we ended up getting the cutscene where Elizabeth is grabbed and killed by Baby, turning Baby's eye color from blue to green. This outfit that this mysterious girl is wearing is nearly identical to the one that Elizabeth was wearing in that minigame, aside from the light up shoes that wouldn't be available for another decade by real world standards. However, in FNAF in 1983, they also had discs that emitted sounds that altered the appearance of things in your brain. So a couple of light up shoes 10 years early doesn't really seem like that much of a stretch. The skirt is also identical to the skirt that Elizabeth wears in that cutscene, and the jacket could easily be covering up a similar styled shirt, which could be pushing the idea that Gregory having two stripes on his shirt is definitely important. But I want to talk about the color. You see, there is no real color on this girl. Bumping up the saturation, brightness, or vibrance actually shows that this girl is drawn in black and white. Have you ever heard of the saying, lack of evidence is sometimes itself evidence? Like maybe you're dealing with a professional killer, or that these thieves are overly cautious. Well, I think that this is a similar situation. Think about it. Why would they draw this girl in black and white? I mean, yeah, sure she's backlit, but being backlit doesn't make you grayscale. This is an indication that the color of this girl's clothing can possibly mean something. Maybe Scott thought that he was too subtle with Gregory, only putting two stripes on his shirt, so this time he went for the full outfit including color. Speaking of color, there's also the matter of her shoes, the only part of her that isn't rimlit that has color. The color of her lights being purple and red. Purple obviously being a nod to William Afton, aka the Purple Guy, a character so synonymous with purple that I can't wear my favorite shirt on this channel now without being called a serial killer. And red, while misleading, actually does tie back to Elizabeth Afton in the form of Baby. Her entire outfit was red, including her bright red hair, and I mean, like, it seems fairly reasonable to assume that this girl has at least a connection to the Afton family, although there is another explanation for the red on her shoes. Give me a minute. Given that the other two humans on this screen, Vanny and Gregory, are also connected to the Aftons, we can guess that this is the case with the blonde girl as well. However, I don't think that the girl herself is Elizabeth. Here's the wow moment, alright? I think that this girl is possessed by Elizabeth. Yeah, I know, right? Hear me out. I know I said that that's not possible with Susie, but that's because we freed her, alright? There are 7 faces on the Blob, the secret antagonist of Security Breach. 4 of them have lit red eyes, and 2 of them don't. The 4 that do are Naked Endo, FNAF 1 Bonnie, FNAF 1 Chica, and Mangle, all of which are somehow present in some form or another in the Pizzaplex. Mangle is Roxy, Bonnie was Bonnie, Chica was Chica, and we fight multiple Endos on multiple occasions. The 2 that aren't present, however, don't have their eyes lit up. Baby and the puppet. But we know that fire doesn't do anything to Remnant, clearly. I mean, Afton has burned, what, 3 times now and none have stuck? And in another video, we determined that the spirits can only be freed when they get their unfinished business resolved, like the missing children in Happiest Day. Baby also doesn't seem too happy about burning in FNAF 6. She in fact says that she wants to make her daddy proud, and dying to fire would really do the opposite considering how many he's survived. So, much like we suspect Michael could have, Elizabeth could have swapped bodies as well, into one of the missing children that Vanny took. Hell, that could have been why Vanny took them in the first place. Afton wanted his daughter to have a vessel, hence why this one looks so much like Elizabeth's original body. This also explains why there is red on her shoes, because it's meant to represent the glowing red eyes that would be in the animatronic head. Remember, it's damn hard to kill an Afton for good, and in the books, Baby is really the one orchestrating everything, at least when it comes to the Afton amalgamation. Especially since this girl is facing away, her eyes could also be green, and I have a feeling that throughout the game we will see her eyes either flip-flop or start off blue and become green or something like that. Or, what I think would be the coolest way to do this would be having her eyes green normally, like if we see it in like a camera or something, but be blue in a mirror. So, here's how I think the story went. After the FNAF 6 fire, William gets a hold of Vanny in order to get his body back. He creates, through the company, a new location on top of the old one to hide his deeds, and then he sets himself free. In the process, though, he notices that his daughter's spirit is also stuck. Since this is the first time they've been together since he put her in the basement of sister location, he decides to help her out, and causes Vanny to start abducting kids who look like his in an effort to rebuild his former family. Given that his youngest son is either still possessing him or now loose to the elements as well, the blonde girl is then kidnapped and Elizabeth finds her suitable host, so she's possessed. And now she follows Vanessa around in an effort to keep an eye on her and remind her that Afton is always watching. She starts manipulating her through encoded chats and messages, and hacks the FNAF AR animatronics to cause them to malfunction, and gets Vanessa promoted to security guard to keep an even closer eye on her. As a part of her observations, she starts therapy just like Vanessa does, and despite her telling the truth about her family history, it doesn't line up with the girl that she's possessed. Hence the one therapist calling out Client 46 for it, and her explanation about what happened to her family seeming to lack emotion, since after all she watched it happen as Baby instead of experiencing it as an actual child. After the collapse, she is either brought back by Afton requesting help with himself, or possibly also to help secure the vessel for Crying Child, who escaped along with a Michael possessed glam rock Freddy. To me, this seems like a game about reuniting with lost brothers, lost hope, but most of all, reuniting a family. The Afton family. After all, we have all the characters now. The misguided father whose misdeeds cost him everything, his loyal daughter who wants to see her family back, the mother who now agrees and is a part of the father's plan, even if unwillingly so, and the sons, one too scared to do anything, and the older brother who helps him beat the circle that their father created, who rights their wrongs and makes up for their family's sins. What do you think? I feel like I'm pretty spot on with this one, and that this could be a great launching point for the next part of the series, but let me know what you think down below. In attend possession. This theory comes from Sebi and stuff on the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza fandom page, and they seem to think that the daycare attendant is possessed, saying, quote, "Okay, so, as in the FNAF 3 bad ending, we see all the souls in the eyes of the animatronics with 2 lights in the golden Freddy head." A theory which I've already disproven since Crying Child, who is presumed to be the other soul, shouldn't have been introduced yet. This has turned into a theory about Golden Freddy having 2 spirits inside of them. Though now I wanted to bring up who else has 2 white eyes, the daycare attendant. Now those eyes don't necessarily glow, but they are 2 blank and empty white eyes, and there are 2 forms of this animatronic. 2 forms, 2 spirits. Now in Security Breach there is a new form to show that the animatronics are possessed, and it's glowing red eyes as a part of the blob. Afton is the excuse since his eyes are purple because obviously it's Afton. Now again, there is something that's part of the daycare attendant that shows his possession feature. The Moondrop animatronic has glowing red eyes. End quote. This leads Sebi to conclude that the daycare attendant is possessed by 2 different spirits. And while this certainly is interesting, I don't think that it would be the case. The daycare attendant doesn't actually have enough of a role in the game to be one of, if not the only possessed animatronic in the game. And again, I've already disproven the 2-eye theory from FNAF 3's bad ending. Link to that video is in the icon. In at 9, the arcade conspiracy. This theory comes from Reddit user averdict_AV on the game theory subreddit discussing Sundrop and their glitching arcade game. This is because I really like the daycare attendant Sundrop and the fact that he is not dangerous and lethal to Gregory, which seems not to be discussed much, but I might have a theory regarding that. My thought is that when we look at the Balloon Boy arcade in Sundrop's room, the Balloon World cabinet, I think it is important that, well, firstly, it's one of the few playable arcade cabinets in the game, but also features a very glitchy section and a glitchy Sundrop. Specifically, only Sundrop Sundrop was glitched in that game, even though Moondrop and Sundrop are both present within the game. I think this is the reason why Sundrop was not hostile and lethal. I believe that the glitch or the hacks done by presumably Vanny or Gregory to some people that were meant for Sundrop were trapped in that arcade machine. There isn't a glitch Moondrop in the arcade because the glitch or the hack actually got to Moondrop, turning them into a dangerous animatronic. That was meant to turn Sundrop dangerous, but it didn't go through and somehow got stuck in the arcade. When we look at all the other animatronic specific arcade games, not Princess Quest, there is only Monty that is playable, but it does not feature any glitches at all. It just calls back to previous game locations. This is because I believe that the glitch got to Monty already. But if I want to interject here and throw in the fact that the arcade conspiracy note mentions that Chica has an arcade game that's glitching and so does Monty, maybe this theory has a little more juice to it. And it ain't name drop. Get it? Actually, wait, you won't get it yet. You will. Coming from Reddit user The Wizard Muss on the FNAF Theories Reddit page, quote, I find it really interesting that the daycare attendant doesn't have a proper character name, especially given their large enough attractions to advertise with, and in this series most of the animatronics have a proper name unless they're a part of a large group, the Mini-Renas, the Bitty Bats, etc. Music Man would have to be the exception to that until Security Breach, now a fair number of them, but I don't know, maybe there's supposed to be multiple daycare attendants? The Pizzaplex is big enough that the daycare would have a lot of kids, and one animatronic probably wouldn't be able to bounce around a group of 20 or so. The only thing that makes me question that is that the parent emails are in the singular when addressing the daycare attendant because they're only dealing with one. I'm pretty sure that Freddy also only refers to one attendant. End quote. And while the character is seemingly called Sundrop and Moondrop, those are also the names of candy that they're advertising. So it might be confusing, maybe they're not actually intended to be named those. But it's also interesting to think that no character actually calls them by those names. But Freddy does mention the names of the other animatronics, so maybe there are meant to be more than one, or that the situation is more complex than we realize, or dare I say the situation is mega complex. Get it? Mega Pizzaplex. And it's 7 Pain at me making these lists. Is it possible that the daycare attendant actually feels physical pain when transforming? It seems unlikely, but still possible due to the seemingly agonizing screams we hear while Sun transforms into Moon during that cutscene. Fun fact, the animatronic doesn't actually switch. In that cutscene there are 2 different models, which is why the character falls behind the desk. The only time we actually see the model change between the 2 is in the Freddy and Friends cartoon. However, is it possible for animatronics to feel pain? It's unclear. I mean, we completely decimate 3 out of the 5 animatronics in the Pizzaplex and they seemingly feel no pain through it, fighting until the very end and then beyond. But Roxy is also programmed for emotional pain, at least on the surface level it appears to be like that. But does this mean that they could have programmed emotional pain and physical pain? We don't know. Maybe the daycare attendant did something wrong, so now switching to the Moon form is painful. Or maybe when he's forcefully changed it's painful, or it could just be that Sun is just fighting to stay in control over Moon, but the change in lighting is just too powerful for him, and that's what that is. He's fighting. Ah! And at 6, Puppet 2.0. There is a theory that I've seen on TikTok. I can't remember who made it for the life of me, okay? I try and wipe all other exposure to FNAF out of my memory as fast as possible, especially when it's on TikTok. I don't want FNAF to invade my TikTok. However, this theory stuck with me, and it's the idea that the daycare attendant is a new form of the puppet animatronic first seen in FNAF 2, which is interesting and kind of plausible. I mean, we know that the puppet was meant to be a security bot, and the daycare attendant acts very much like a security guard until the lights go off. And when he kicks us out, he does call for security, and then every hour he roams the Pizzaplex like security, but there's still more to it than that. The Moondrop form of the daycare attendant also flies around on wires, much like a marionette would. Marionette being another word for puppet, but specifically a puppet on strings, which is something also often associated with the puppet from FNAF 2. I mean, how else could they jump from the prize counter to your office? They don't need the strings to move, but they both use the strings to get around quickly when they need to, which is also something that's pointed out on the villains fandom page for the daycare attendant. So maybe it's something that we should be considering. Like I guess we need a surrogate puppet after all, now that Charlotte's put to rest, don't we? No, we don't. Halfway through into number 5, half infected. This theory comes to us from Love Nathan Carr on the Game Theory subreddit and proposes an idea as to how just the Moondrop side of the daycare attendant got infected with the Afton virus. Here's a quote from their post. Sundrop seems to be the only one that has no history from what I've seen with the virus. As shown in what behavior he does partake in, he appears to cry when we go missing, he cleans up the place, he tries to entertain us, and he tries to keep us out of trouble. He does not partake in attempting to kill or capture us like the others. The reason behind this is Sundrop and Moondrop are two entities in one body. They have different coding. So let's say the story before the virus came to all the animatronics is that the mall is dark for the entire night because Moondrop is not a problem. He doesn't try to hurt anyone. But then Vanny shows up, and since the animatronics were most likely infected at night, it would make a decent amount of sense. The two sides have different functions and would therefore require separate programming, at least if they are two halves of one whole animatronic. And there's not multiple of them like we discussed earlier. In at 4, look out. Now this is a separate theory that I found within the Love Nathan Carr post on the Game Theory subreddit that I wanted to address separately. So quote from later on in that same post, actually it's right after I ended the last quote. The night the virus came, Moondrop was infected with the other animatronics, leaving them with a lust to kill or kidnap. Sundrop figures this out, and at some point he brings it up to the proper authorities. So they make the daycare and the Pizzaplex constantly lit to stop Moondrop. This is where Sundrop gets scared of the lights turning off, as people will get hurt if it happens, end quote. So this user seems to be suggesting that Sundrop knows what Moondrop is doing and tries to stop it from happening, which could explain why he's fighting to stay in control when the lights go out. I don't know, it's certainly an interesting concept, but it relies more on conjecture and assumption rather than evidence, so I'm gonna have to say objection, hearsay on that one. And at 3, the light. Coming from user ChickNugs on Twitter, they believe that Gregory would actually have been safer with Sundrop in the daycare rather than with Freddy. Quote, unpopular opinion, Gregory was perfectly safe and okay to stay with Sun until 6 AM. Sun most likely would have protected him against anyone else, although Freddy was more caring and thoughtful of what Gregory desired than Sun. Yet it would have been annoying to stay with Sun and be forced to play, but it was undeniably the safest option, apart from staying trapped in Freddy's chest cavity and doing until 6 AM as Freddy recharged the entire time. And which, you know what, it's actually a fairly valid point. I'd still say that being in Freddy's green room and sleeping through the night was the best option, since Vanessa never thought to look in there, only figuring out that they were working together after hearing the Fazwatch call out in Freddy's voice. However, this makes another Twitter user going by the name Dante Loyal suggest that the whole he'd be safe with Sundrop thing is the reason the lights get turned off in the first place, and that Vanny was probably the one to do it so that Gregory wouldn't end up being safe. But ultimately, in at number 2, multiple daycare attendants. Now, we kind of touched on this earlier, but there's actually evidence in the game that can kind of help us. Now, we only see one daycare attendant at a time, but there is the possibility that there are multiple within the Pizzaplex. One indication to this possibility is actually within the daycare itself. See, if Gregory tries to return to the daycare after being thrown out, the daycare attendant, as Sundrop, will appear in the slide and throw him out once again. However, the other animatronics will not come if this happens. Interestingly enough though, this can still happen even when Moon is the dominant personality and running around the Pizzaplex, meaning that even if the Moon animatronic is right behind you at the top of the hour, you can still try and get into the daycare and be rejected by Sun, suggesting that there are more than one of this character. But the game is imperfect and there are glitches galore, so we cannot confirm this as an impossibility or a confirmation. So looks like, as per usual in the FNAF series, all we have is idle speculation and propositions rather than any actual solid statements. Wonderful. It's like the FNAF series has IBS with its lore. And finally, in at number 1, aw man. A customer complaint in one of the lore duffel bags that you can find throughout the Pizzaplex has an angry parent revealing that their child, who previously had no sleep-related issues, has begun refusing to sleep with the lights off and started wetting the bed after being left in the daycare. It is implied that said child has been traumatized by the daycare attendant's moon form. But what could this thing have done to traumatize this kid if they were within the confines of the daycare? Sure, when we get the lights off, we get some psycho dude trying to kill us, but when it's an actual daycare session, why is it so traumatizing? Well, that's where the name and number comes in. Yeah. You see, in the Daycare attendant mods video, I mentioned multiple times how this dude gives me Chris Hansen conversation Needin vibes. And the easiest way to say this without YouTube getting mad is by saying creeper. Aw man, that's right, he's a creeper. I think we all know where I'm going with this. I mean, Son seriously grabs you and then forces you to play with him, and if you try to leave, he will pick you up and put you right back in your place during the first part of this boss battle. So, I mean, like, if this dude was going around making kids feel uncomfortable and then ruining their innocence, I would expect it. So, yeah, don't put your kids in the FNAF daycare. Last time I came to the conclusion that this mysterious girl is one of this round's missing children that got possessed by Elizabeth. And while I do still firmly believe that, this got me thinking, who else could it possibly be? We asked you loyal subscribers on a community post, and the overwhelming conclusion was that the majority of you are wrong. Okay, just kidding. A lot of you though seem to think that this could be Vanessa as a ghost. And despite the fact that Vanny's eyes are on the poster, I think that you might actually be onto something. So let's talk about it. Although I just need to put this out there, the identity of this little girl is 100% not Susie, the girl who possesses Chica, okay? Susie has been dead for a very long time when this game takes place, being dead over 50 years or so, and while that doesn't really matter in the context of FNAF, there's still no way it could be. You may be thinking that she could be possessed by Susie, but we release Susie's spirit in the Happiest Day minigame. Some assume that this takes place at the end of the timeline, however I don't think that's true, considering how FNAF 3 was supposed to be the end, and that's when FNAF 3 is over and we get the good ending. So to me, that indicates that the Happiest Day minigame takes place around the time of FNAF 3, especially considering how the simulated pizzeria from FNAF 6 didn't have to lure the original animatronics back to the pizzeria, meaning that they did not need to be released, because they had already been dealt with. So in regards to this theory, the first thing I need to disprove is that it's impossible, since Vanny's eyes are in the corner. But just because we see some faded eyes, it doesn't mean that a spirit cannot be separate from a body. I mean, look at Afton, for example. This man was code that possessed a human while his body was stuck in an underground pizzeria. So there is a precedent for their body being around without their soul. The issue in my mind comes around when we see that since Vanny's eyes are glowing, her body is operational, which kinda shoots this theory between the eyes until you remember that there are multiple things possessing Vanny's body. One version of Glitch Trap's code and then Vanessa herself. So we can go one of two ways with this now. The fact that Vanny's body may solely be Glitch Trap now, or the fact that Glitch Trap is still operating in Vanessa, but Burn Trap is also Afton. He's back as Afton, okay? Either way, there are two versions of Afton in operation right now. One of them is coded and the other is possibly not, but we can't really be sure. And William isn't the only person to have a coded version. I mean, remember Princess Quest? The game designed to keep Vanessa at bay while William wreaks havoc as Vanny? I mean, the Princess Quest ending, otherwise known as the best ending, is the only ending to have 3 stars. It had some significance, but what? It's a question we've been asking ever since Security Breach ended. Another one is what happened to the Princess Quest game machines located around the Pizzaplex. It seems reasonable that at the very least the one in Roxy's salon was destroyed, and if the Pizzaplex is in ruins, then the others must have been destroyed too, right? Well, if that is the case, what happens to Vanessa's spirit? Like, is it released, or does it fade away into nothing? It's not fading away, not with unfinished business still afoot. The spirit of Vanessa had to go somewhere, but where could it go? Well, this could be some random girl that Vanessa just grabbed off the street or that was walking by, or it could still be one of the missing children that was trapped in the building. Either way, whoever they are, it's really of little consequence if this is really Vanessa possessing them. Okay, the only thing that matters in this context is that Vanessa's possessing them, not who the kid is, I'm guessing. The precedent is set in this universe where one person can possess multiple things if one version that is possessing something is coded and the other is a spirit. So, this is definitely possible. The character on the poster is also actually completely grayscale, aside from the rim lighting thanks to her flashlight and the color of her lights on the shoes that she's wearing. These are also colored purple and red, colors that in this game specifically are linked to William because it's purple. I mean, I can't even wear a shirt on this channel now without being called the purple guy. So yeah, purple equals Afton, Burn Trap, William, whatever. And then Vanny with her giant glowing red eyes are also on this poster, okay? It's like they wanted us to make this connection. But if they wanted us to make the connection, does that mean that this is all intentional, or is it mostly just a red herring or MacGuffin to keep us away from the real story? Now first, your instinct may be that this is impossible, okay? And honestly, that was my first instinct too. I mean, Susie's been dead since like 1985 with the missing children's incident, and she ends up possessing Chica, who is then set free and happy as a day. So like, how is it even remotely possible? Well, some say that the happiest day minigame that sets Susie free really takes place at the very end of the timeline, no matter when that ends up being. Meaning that at the time of security breach, none of the original 5 animatronics have actually been released. Which means that if we go off the fact that this girl is possessed, this is entirely possible. I mean, Susie is the first of the missing children, and definitely seemingly the most important one, given the fact that we see her as a kid in the Fruity Maze minigame's reflection. And I mean, even if the one you should not have killed is Cassidy, it's just a blown out version of her face. But the puppet is present for the Happiest Day minigame, and they get released in FNAF 6, right? There's one key detail, however, that really makes me unsure. Something that's been in the back of my brain for a while, but it may make a few people mad because it involves using the novels. In the original novel trilogy, starting with the Silver Eyes, the Funtime animatronics are injected with Remnant made from the original 5 possessed animatronics, meaning that if Remnant does indeed contain part of the soul instead of just being metal that once had a soul, the original 5, despite being set free in Happiest Day, no matter when it takes place, could still have the slightest bit of spirit form in the main world, I guess. Which could also explain why Molten Freddy had to show up along with Scrap Baby, also known as Elizabeth, in FNAF 6, unless we just assume that there was a slight bit of Elizabeth remaining in Ennard after she left, or if we assume that Henry wanted to get rid of all traces of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, or all things that Afton created, which at that point also included his son. That's a lot of assumptions. So without assuming anything, but also while using the books to get some further context, which some people don't like, it is possible that after they burned in FNAF 6, much like Afton, Susie's spirit was set loose. Not free, like it didn't move on, but it was just loose in the atmosphere, willing to grab onto whatever it could. Or that it merged into the blob, and then the fire that Gregory causes that caused the cave-in ended up setting her soul loose again, and then she possessed a person. I don't think that there is really any explanation that could mean that this is Susie's original body. That seems fundamentally impossible. So whoever this is, if she is a character we've already met prior to this game, she would have to be possessed. Unless this is an entirely new character, which is absolutely possible. I mean, it doesn't have to be someone that's already established, obviously, but I mean, it's fun to speculate and theorize nonetheless. Another indication that I've seen a few people point out is that Chica does actually also appear on this poster, which is certainly an interesting choice. I mean, she was certainly the most, popular enemy animatronic in this game, and the other animatronics are very out of commission even before the collapse. I mean, Roxy couldn't see, and Monty was split in two. But since we can't really take anything in FNAF at first glance, is this actually meant to indicate the identity of our mystery girl? It's certainly a possibility. I mean, the only ones who really know are Steelwool, Scott, and whoever made the poster. But given Chica's state, I'm guessing that this is just meant to indicate a timeline, that this occurs after the collapse rather than at some other time prior to the game starting, and then maybe they rebuild the Pizzaplex, or maybe even long after it ends. Because I mean, look at her, okay? Chica has got to be probably one of the most resilient animatronics in the group, because she's still kicking despite being crushed by a trash compactor and then having a building land on top of her, and she still has most of her smoking hot bod. Some of it was removed, some of it was cracked, but her face also has seemingly melted, possibly due to the fire we were using to kill Burn Trap, or maybe it's just because a fire started in the kitchen when the building collapsed, and then she thought that it was just really hot pizza. I don't know. She's also lost the lower half of her left arm, her left, not your left. Remember that, I've made that mistake. And she's also lost her right leg warmer. The casing on her midriff and right arm is gone, but other than that, she is still fairly intact. Her endoskeleton is, at the very least, especially compared to Monty. Also, interestingly enough, only Chica's white face melted, meaning that it looks like someone, spilt frosting all over her face. Yeah, I guess that takes the term busted to a whole new level. But other than that, there aren't really any connections between her and Susie. Probably the most resilient animatronic in the group because, again, she's still kicking. Susie was possessing the yellow Chica, so I feel like this Chica being white is meant to show us that this is not going to be like the same sort of situation. So I don't think that relating this Chica to that Chica or this Chica to Susie is really logical in this case. I think it's a bad idea, okay? No, I guarantee you that this is not going to be Susie, and if it is, I'm going to quit FNAF. Look. Yes, she's blonde, and yes, Susie was blonde, but she was also blonde in 1985, okay? It's been like 50 years since the missing children's incident in the games, and the original Chica animatronic was destroyed, and Susie's spirit was released, okay? Happiest Day does not take place at the end of the timeline. The pigtails on this girl are very reminiscent of Baby, but this girl has blonde hair, and while we may not be able to see her face, I feel like it is possible that she does have green eyes, okay? Because anyone with blonde hair instantly makes me think of William Afton, not Susie. Since Elizabeth has more impact to the story than Susie, and even in the books, Baby ends up having more of an impact thanks to the Afton amalgam. And considering the blob that got introduced in this game is very much similar to that amalgam, this still makes the most sense to me, okay? But I figured that I'd go through the possibilities in separate videos just for good measure, okay? I'm not sure. Who do you think this little girl is, alright? Do you think it's Elizabeth's spirit? Do you think it's Vanessa's spirit? Do you think it's Susie's spirit? Or just some random stupid kid who wandered into a house of horror? Be sure you let me know down below. I'm still adamant on Elizabeth, but I don't know, maybe it's just a stupid kid. And honestly, you know what, if it's a stupid kid, they deserve it.
Okay, so admittedly, Glamrock Freddy is my favorite character, and then probably Glamrock Chica, and then Vanny, then Gregory, but he ranks in the top at least because he is the protagonist, and that's just how that cookie crumbles. But speaking of cookies, can you eat them if you're a ghost? Perhaps not. Part of the reason why I was initially suspicious of Gregory being a ghost was his very mysterious origin. The Pizzaplex seems to have no records of him, and is unable to locate his parents or even any trace of him in the system, implying he somehow, I guess, snuck into the Pizzaplex, or perhaps he is a victim that never left. I know we get that ending where Gregory is sleeping in the streets homeless, but don't worry, I'll be talking about that too, and how I think that could actually play into my theory of Gregory being a ghost and possibly a victim of villainous and murderous animatronics. But more on that later. Getting back to those cookies, let's talk about them. Can you eat cookies or drink drinks if you're dead? Well, I personally do not think you can. The drinks and food wouldn't be able to be processed by your ghostly form, so it really wouldn't make sense for you to be able to. We've all seen what happens when someone like Slimer from Ghostbuster eats food. It kind of just goes right through him, and if anything, it turns into like slime or ectoplasm. You can't really like process it properly. It's pretty gross. Now, Gregory never seems to be compelled to eat, so we don't know for sure, but it also seems odd that you would be collecting so many tasty and limited edition drinks and food items without being able to eat them, which in this game, for some reason, you just can't do that. It's especially weird actually because when you play in Help Wanted, you can eat things, and that's like a VR game, so I don't understand how that all works. And throughout the course of the evening, Gregory doesn't even express that he is hungry, and that is a long time and a lot of running around to do and not to be hungry from. If you're alive, that is. Which, like I said, I really think this is more evidence that Gregory may no longer be considered as such. Spirits don't really have a need to get hungry as they don't have proper bods, so they don't need to like fuel them. They're just ghosty ghosts. They don't have physical forms, you know? Aside from not being able to eat, you also don't seem to feel much of any normal human pains. Gregory gets tired periodically from prolonged running and crawling in terms of his stamina bar, but he doesn't actually express getting tired in terms of like being sleepy. He's never like, oh my gosh, I'm like so tired. Okay, so like maybe when Moondrop is coming around trying to make you sleepy, but I don't know, that's some weird stuff. That's a thing that every time I talk about it, I'm like, I don't even know if this should be in this game. Considering how late Gregory is staying up for a normal human child, it's pretty odd that he doesn't ever express being like tired from staying up too late. Of course, if you're a robot, then the normal everyday pains experienced in human life wouldn't affect you. You don't need to sleep, so why would you get tired? Which, you know, he could also be an animatronic. Sure, we see him trying to sleep in an alley in one of the endings, but we don't actually hear him express feeling tired or ever see him fully asleep. So I'm thinking either animatronic or ghosty ghost. Take your pick. We're focusing on ghosts though in this theory, so let's get back to that. Right at the beginning of this game, I was pretty suspicious of Gregory when it came to him being a real living kid. Something was weird about him. I don't know, there's something off about Gregory. I just look at him and I'm like, I don't know, what's up with you? Are you real? Are you a real boy? Right at the beginning, he generally just seemed to be too big to actually fit into Freddy's stomach cavity. Especially when you learn, at least initially, there was also a Fazwatch dispenser in there somehow. I know these stomachs are in theory possibly based off of William's designs, which were about capturing kids, or at least seemed to be from his sinister perspective. But in this game, even Glamrock Freddy seems to think Gregory moving around inside of him is dangerous, as that is an area that is really only meant to be large enough for moving things like birthday cakes and piñatas. I imagine even the piñatas would actually have to be really small though, because that cavity does not look big enough for a piñata to me. Also, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen a birthday cake for a kid's party that was large enough to be considered the size of a small child. Like, how big would that cake have to be for this to work? Like, he's have to be carrying around giant cakes in his stomach. Also, am I just not eating large enough cakes? Is that what is happening here? Am I missing out? Are people giving me tiny little like dinky cakes for my birthday? If that's the reality though, if I'm not just like getting tiny cakes and people are ripping me off on my birthday, I'm gonna be real sad. Even when I make cakes though, I don't make them that big. Let me know your thoughts about cake sizes down in the comments below, and let me know how big the biggest birthday cake you've ever seen or made in person was. Maybe there's something I'm missing out on here. Maybe I'm just not making or eating large enough cakes. Sweet, ginormous birthday cakes. Where are you? Another thing that seems odd is you never really wear the clothes that you collect. At least not as far as we can tell or see. Now they might increase your stats to just have them like in your inventory, but as far as we know, Gregory never puts those items on. Is this because he always has to remain in the outfit that he died in? Because, you know, he's a freaking ghost? Perhaps the only clothes he can wear are the ones he's already wearing. And I know what you're thinking, okay, but then what about the Fazwatch? Well, the Fazwatch could still be an item that Gregory could have equipped because it doesn't actually interfere with the ethereal clothes that he's already wearing. After all, the Fazwatch is more of an accessory really than like an outfit choice. Also, if my theory is right and he is a spooktacular spirit, it's also very likely that he's like a poltergeist who can interact with and hold objects in the real world, like the flashlight, the laser blaster, his Fazwatch, and other such items that he is able to use. Though even then, you don't typically see poltergeists put on physical clothing for some reason. Ghosts might be able to change their appearance, but usually not by physically dressing up. Like a sheet. I think that's the most I've ever seen ghosts wear. I feel like in Beetlejuice they wear sheets at one point, right? They're trying to scare everybody. But that's one piece. I feel like if you had to like have pants and like a shirt and shoes and socks and all that stuff, that's like a lot of clothing for you to have to like maintain a physical form to wear it. So I think it's just too much work for a ghost? I don't know. I would propose when it came to Gregory being a ghost at the Pizzaplex that he was a victim who went missing there. Perhaps that's why there are no records of him, because Afton had them wiped clean. I imagine he would find a way to do that for all of his victims here so that he could preserve his hunting ground. It also seems odd that Gregory has no relatives to speak of. The game leads us to believe this is because Gregory is homeless, and even possibly suggests that he or someone at least may have been living in the Pizzaplex prior to the events of Security Breach, with hidden alcoves where it looks like someone has been kind of like squatting and living. And with one of the endings showing Gregory living in a gutter, huddling under a newspaper for warmth. Is it also possible that Gregory would always be cold if he was a ghost? So could his seeking warmth in that ending also be a hint that he's no longer of this world? That might be a bit of a stretch, but it's still something to consider at least. I mean, ghosts are usually very cold. That's, you know, they say when a ghost passes through you feel like a chill. So I'm just saying it could be a connection. I know I'm stretching, but just come with me on this ghostly journey. me, please. Come with me. It'll be fun. Despite the fact that Security Breach seems to want us to think that Gregory is homeless, it's also possible that he simply can't remember his home. After all, for being homeless, he looks relatively well kept and well dressed. And who gave him that band-aid on his cheek, or where did he get it from if he doesn't have literally anyone around to look after him? Did he run away from home? Or is it that Gregory no longer remembers his home because his life was taken from him during a visit to the Pizzaplex and now he basically haunts it, his soul trapped due to his unsolved murder and the traumatic nature of his death? Perhaps this experience was so traumatic that he doesn't even remember that he's dead, which is why he doesn't even try to communicate it to Freddy or even really reflect on it himself while alone. I think if he is a ghost, he doesn't really fully understand that himself. This could also imply why the real and true ending for this game has to be in defeating William Afton, aka Burn Trap. It could be that this is Gregory's unfinished business, and the ending we get if Vanny is redeemed with Vanessa, Freddy, and Gregory on the hill is actually symbolizing that they have all crossed over and now get to be together and at peace. After all, that whole hill with the tree and everything, it definitely reminds me of the gravestones that we've seen before in FNAF, so to me it feels very ghost vibes, in my opinion. Of course, one theory we've been discussing on Top 10 Gaming for a while since before the release of Security Breach is that Gregory could actually be Crying Child. If so, this also kind of fits with our ghost theory. I mean, sure, Crying Child could be an animatronic replacement child who was created after the original Crying Child's death. Gregory could be a lifelike animatronic as such, but it's also possible that Gregory, if he is a ghost, is actually the spirit of Crying Child. Because although we have theories about where that spirit is, we've never really fully gotten any confirmation on those theories, I don't think. They're still kind of theories. Perhaps that is why he is so closely tied to the Pizzaplex, which was also built on top of the Freddy's location we manage in FNAF 6, Pizzeria Simulator, where it's believed all the souls were gathered as part of Henry's plot to finally defeat Afton and then set all his victims' souls free. And if you still aren't sure if Gregory is Crying Child or not, that's fine. I still say they have lots of similarities, but Gregory doesn't need to be Crying Child for him to also be a ghost. It just seems like another theoretical connection that supports the ghost theory that we're discussing here.
The main issue I've been having is whether William is dead or alive. And there are a couple different things to consider here. Firstly, he is seemingly in a new endoskeleton, which would indicate that he's dead and Glitch Trap's consciousness is just being transferred into Burn Trap spot via the recharge station. But his head is clearly visible. You can see his skull and his actual human jaw, meaning that he could still be holding on to this world via that head, especially given who we're talking about here. The most stubborn to ever grace our screens. This also can't be innuendo, and just the model that they're using for the others since it was easier and they could release the game faster. This seems to be indicated by the way that Burn Trap walks. If this was a new endoskeleton, why would he be shambling like a zombie? But the claws and repaired sections to the actual endo also seem to indicate that this is also a new endo and possibly even Glamrock Bonnie's. So there's a whole lot of wrong going on here. All the points are intersecting and it's not fun. Originally, I was against the whole Glamrock Bonnie endoskeleton thing because, well, frankly, the body in the suit kind of disproved it for me, but I think I might have found a way to make it work. However, looking at the model, I'm still not 100% sure. If this was the Glamrock Bonnie endo, it would need to have broader shoulders and actually be shorter. Even scaling the Glamrock endo so that they're the same height, the endos, when posed the same and lined up, they don't match. There are similarities, of course, between the two designs, but there aren't enough similarities where I can call this even really above 50%. There's also the issue of the muscles being woven throughout the body, or maybe those are nerve fibers. If it was just the head, I'd understand, since they could have just pulled the old endo head and put it onto the new body. Since all the parts were intertwined, Afton's head would have come with it. But with the muscles throughout the rest of the endo, that's way too intricate to actually have been placed there. And they would only be there and not dangling if it had been stuck there after being shoved full of machine parts. I don't think that they're taking super glue to glue these fibers back onto a new endoskeleton. If Afton was going to transfer his head to a new endo, it wouldn't come with the rest of his body bits. It wouldn't. That's not how it works. Which would mean this would have to be Springtrap's endoskeleton, which also explains why it's so run down, why he shambles, and why he hardly has any casing. And Springtrap's design also seems to change from game to game. From FNAF 3 to FNAF 6, he was totally different, so him changing again in security breach seems like no big deal in comparison. It's basically normal for him to get a newer and seemingly scarier attempt at his design with a new game, and at least this has an understandable progression from the last game and even from FNAF 3, since it's more run down and not just a bigger head like Scraptrap. It's like he sold his soul for a bigger head and then the demon kind of made a joke out of it. The most reasonable assumption that I have for what happened though was that he was given the hands of Glamrock Bonnie since it has the claws, and just he wasn't given the entire endoskeleton. But then again, his arms have the bits of muscle and nerve fibers as well, which means that it would have to have been his old one, it would have to have been there from the start, it would have to be the arm of the old endoskeleton, which is a whole other conundrum because Scraptrap was missing an arm and Springtrap didn't have any casing on his foot, yet here we are. I just think that we have to kind of leave this one up to artistic license and accept that it's meant to be the same endoskeleton, just with a replacement part or two from Glamrock Bonnie instead of like the entire endoskeleton. It makes sense, honestly, and it's really the only reasonable explanation that we have. Unless the colors are wrong on the images that I was looking at and the bits on the hands are just meant to be melted casing, which is possible, but I doubt it. As for if he's wanted dead or alive, I think this version of Afton is actually finally dead. And honestly, I'm happy about that because it means that even if he's still here, we can kill him off for good. This is the most logical conclusion to me because, well, other than him basically being only a head, this guy has had multiple backslides of, oh, I'm dead, just kidding. And this time around, while we instantly predicted that he had indeed survived, I think that Scott is finally flipping the narrative on us. We predicted it, so it's not gonna happen. Afton is no longer connected to his body, as we can clearly see from the formation of Glitchtrap. And Glitchtrap being created would only be possible if Afton died, since the one you should not have killed was dead set on keeping him breathing. But Burntrap, this guy doesn't even have lungs anymore. So yeah, this version of Afton's body is dead, but his consciousness lives on. Like how there's like the conspiracy that Walt Disney froze his head. Yeah, well, that's kind of what they did with Glitchtrap. And then that programming was probably uploaded into his old host, or I guess vessel, since I've been rewatching Supernatural. Basically, this guy would be impossible if he wasn't just Afton's code loaded onto an endoskeleton. Plus, the eyes are clearly robotic this time around with purple pupils, rather than the previous iterations that had seemingly real eyes, Afton's actual eyes, since it was in suit mode after he got snapped. And opening his head in those like secret FNAF 3 screens revealed that it was actually like his eyes because they were seemingly in the same place. So, all in all, here's the story of Burntrap as far as I can tell. During the FNAF 6 fire, Afton passes out. Not dead, but still somehow alive thanks to the one you should not have killed, Crying Child. This leads to the events of Ultimate Custom Night that sees Afton stuck in his own mind trying to escape so that his spirit can move on. But Crying Child, represented by a golden bear like the one who crushed his skull, tries to keep him stuck, until eventually he throws everything that he has at him. 50-20 mode. After being so weakened by the fire, William survives this attack on his mind, and Crying Child's spirit is set free, hence the spasming bear at the end of that mode. That's him burning as the fire sets his soul free. William's soul then latches onto the nearest thing that it can find, one of the hard drives in the storage room that the Scraptrap animatronic was being kept in. One that gets scanned to create the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience as the company tries to rebuild its reputation. Then, not wanting to waste the land that was bought for their company, Fazbear Entertainment begins building a new pizzaplex on top of their old location. Whether this is due to Glitchtrap possessing someone higher up at the company through the game or someone just wanting to save money is up in the air, but the remains of the FNAF 6 simulated pizzeria are buried under the pizzaplex's foundation. That's when Vanessa comes along, our player character from Help Wanted, who reassembles the 16 cassette tapes in an effort to destroy Afton once and for all, but ultimately fails. When our mind is distracted by following Tape Girl's instructions, William locks us in our mind and in the Princess Quest minigame that would later get ported to an arcade cabinet for insurance purposes. And by insurance, I mean like insurance on Vanessa so that she wouldn't easily be able to escape. As Vanny, William then uses the animatronics to dig out his body and put his old endoskeleton in a recharge station so that when he's able to transfer himself back into it, he'll be able to move. After all, at this point, he's not a spirit, but simply coding, which means that in another game, if he is still alive, we'll actually be able to kill him off. He also gives his old suit some upgrades in the form of Glamrock Bonnie's hands and right foot. Why would he not not go with a new, more powerful endo, you ask? Because it's William and his spring Bonnie suit. It's his body in there. Of course he'd want it back. He's been that way for like at least 40 years at this point. It's all he knows. Then as Gregory and Freddy jump down into the pit, William can sense it. Either because he's an animatronic, because one or both of them are meant to be his kids, or something else, he activates his body even though it's not fully charged and tries to take over Freddy. He's not fully charged, hence the shambling, which Gregory ends up preventing with fire, which has surely traumatized Afton by now, and considering how he's only code, this time fire would actually finish the job. Eventually, the place actually catches on fire and Freddy and Gregory escape, but the blob grabs hold of William. Whether it was to save him or seal his fate is unknown, but this almost certainly isn't the end of William Afton's story.